Welcome to Everything Co-op, bringing you information on how cooperatives can help improve your quality of life. This show is being sponsored by the National Co-op Bank, NCB. The NCB is dedicated to strengthening communities nationwide for the delivery of banking and financial services for the nation's cooperatives, their members, and other socially responsible organizations. For more information on the power of community ownership, visit ncb.coop. That's ncb.coop. Now stay tuned for your host, Vernon Oakes.
Welcome, everybody. This is Vernon Oakes. Welcome to the program, Everything Co-op. This month, we are celebrating National Native American Heritage Month, and we're having our second voice. It is Bijiibah Begaye. Good morning, Bijiibah.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. Where are you this morning? What part of the world?
I am currently in Flagstaff, Arizona, but our organization is based in New Mexico.
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Albuquerque, New Mexico, that's right.
And you're indigenous, Native American. What tribe are you with?
So I'm an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. If you don't mind, I would like to do my traditional introduction.
Okay.
Just for listeners back home, Bijiibah Begaye nishya shashtana anishla kazashana bashishin maitza dashiche tachitni dashanala sekon bakodishya ho a.
I understood that. Yes, that's Navajo Nation language. Is that what you?
It is.
What is it called? What's the language called?
It's Dinabazad.
So last week we had a lady in from Zuni, and their language went back 7,000 years. How far back did yours go?
I don't know. That's a good question. According to our origin stories, it came from talking gods, so the wind, as far back as the wind.
Ah, that might be more than 7,000 years. Okay. Okay. The wind brought the language. Great. So the Navajo Nation had in the news a lot with the COVID, tremendous pre-existing conditions. It sounds like worse than African-American cultures. We had really bad with diabetes and hypertension and so forth in the neighborhoods, and people don't have health care. What was it like in the Navajo Nation with COVID?
Oh, man. Scary. Really terrifying, to be perfectly honest. We live in very isolated and rural communities, and people were buying bulk off of the shelves, and for communities that depend on buying bulk, going into town and not being able to find food, knowing that water was, instrumental to fighting off, the pandemic, not having access to water was scary. We have a lot of intergenerational homes. So the fear of your child getting sick or your grandparent getting sick, inadvertently. So all of it was a test, truly. A test of resilience, of community, of, I'm going to say resilience.
Okay. I'd see it as a huge test, scary test. And when you say intergenerational, that's children, parents, grandparents, maybe even great-grandparents living in the same household.
Yeah.
And without access to water?
Without access to running water, yes.
So it's hard to clean the house and wash hands. They said wash your hands often. If you don't have running water, how do you do that? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move away from that because that's really scary on my back. That's awful. So tell me about your growing up, though. Where did you grow up, and where did you go to school?
I grew up in a small community called Coalmine Mesa. It's in Coalmine Canyon on the Navajo Nation. And I went to school in a little bit of a bigger community, Tuba City, Arizona. And that's where I grew up, on the Navajo Nation.
So in your schools, was it American public school or a Navajo Nation public school?
So I went to both a Bureau of Indian Affairs school, a BIA school, and I went to a state school. They were right next to each other. They actually had been one school and they split off and became two different schools. So I would hop the fence to take my Spanish classes at the state school, and then I would hop back over to go to my federal Indian classes at the BIA school.
In either of the schools, did they teach the Navajo Nation culture or language or history?
They do, yes, both schools did. That was part of the education system they provided, K through 12. So we got, I wouldn't call it immersion, but language classes were a major part of that.
So you learned a language like your normal introduction that you did at first, your Navajo Nation language introduction in the schools. Did you all speak the language in your homes too?
My community, so I came from a very traditional home, and English was not our first language. It was something that when we moved from Piñon, Arizona to Tuba City for school, that I picked up more English. But there's a history of boarding schools, and my dad, in realizing that we were not English speakers, chose to speak to us just in English. So I lost a lot of it, and he thought that was a good way to help us succeed in the educational system.
Okay, so you lost a lot of your natural traditional language, and you picked up English. Your father felt like that's the way that you can be successful in this culture, in this overall huge, larger culture, in particular in school. So what about college? You went K through 12?
I did.
Okay.
I went off to the University of Arizona, and I had these aspirations of becoming a lawyer, and I ended up in youth development. And that youth development work actually took me all over. I went to Costa Rica, I went to Mongolia, and I got to go back home with that initiative. So,
youth development. What is youth development? What is that? Is there a major called youth development?
It was through the Family Consumer Sciences. So youth development was a focus of theirs. I got to work with Governor Napolitano and the director of the department, Lynn Borden. And that work led me to becoming a program director through Cooperative Extension, and took me right back home. And I got to work with high school age students that were considered at risk.
Okay. So you were high school age, working with high school age. Got it. Okay. You're a little bit older than them. That reminds me of my first year of teaching college. My first year of teaching, I was 21 teaching 16-year-olds, and they tried me. And then the second year of teaching, I was teaching in New York at City University. I was 24 teaching people younger and older than me in the class. And so sometimes it's harder to get respect and get control of these class when you're their age or a little bit older. So I got it. But why co-ops? Why did you get into co-ops?
I had moved back east for a while, and co-ops are everywhere back east. I had come back to the Navajo Nation to raise my family, and it was right when the pandemic hit. So being on the Navajo Nation at the time, I grew up in a community that is called the Bennett Freeze, and it was frozen to development. And it was frozen to development by Senator Bennett in 1966. And the idea was that by freezing the land to development, it would force negotiations between the Navajo and Hopi people. And that that freeze on development was only supposed to last about 2 to 4 years. And it went, I think, 53 years, something like that, well into 2009. And because of that freeze, there's no infrastructure, literally no infrastructure. If people had a hole in their roof, if their door was falling off, if they needed a window, that was forbidden. So we had a lot of dilapidated homes, access to food, childcare, you name it. And the pandemic came along, and our government shut down, which for us was a huge shock. We had this idea that there were going to be resources that were going to come in we kind of looked out for FEMA for a while, and nobody came. Really, nobody came.
Well,
And
can I get you to hold a second? I'm sorry. So
no,
you moved back from the East Coast with your family. How many people in your family?
I have 3 children.
3 children. How old are they?
They are 3, 5, and 9 now.
Okay. 3, 5, and 9 now. You moved back, right, February or March or whatever in 2020, right before the pandemic. And you move into a community called Bennett Freeze where you can't do any development. You can't fix doors. I don't even think of fixing doors as development. I think of that as maintenance. I think of development as building new houses, building new infrastructure, putting in roads and sewage and water lines and all. I think of that as development, the kind of things that President Biden is talking about doing. So there's none of that going on. And then you hit this pandemic, and you say to me that the government closed down. Well, the government, is that the Navajo government or the Indian affairs or all of the above?
That was the Navajo Nation. The Navajo Nation shut down, and we had shelter-in-place orders. So there were heavy fines. If we left outside of curfew, people weren't allowed to come into the Navajo Nation. That really restricted our ability to get aid from outside organizations. Eventually, we had to take it upon ourselves to find those resources.
So where does co-ops fit into all of this?
So co-ops fit into this as an economic development opportunity. Co-ops, when we took a hard look at where our communities were with the lack of infrastructure, with the lack of resources, businesses, all of it, from the ground up, we had to come together. Co-ops provided us with an opportunity to pool our resources together and to really, find a thriving model that fits inherently with our community needs, but also, we're talking about sovereignty and self-determination. Decades of forest removal, land dispossession, economic underdevelopment have really hindered our ability to develop businesses, to thrive. And the co-op model fits beautifully with the idea that we can determine how we govern ourselves. So
determine how we govern ourselves.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So you're sitting there. COVID's coming on. You don't have the resources. The Navajo Nation closes down, put on curfews, and nobody's coming to your aid. So somewhere you've got to, as a community, you've got to be able to solve major issues, major problems. And this is what co-ops do. They solve community problems. Wow. How did you hear about the co-op model, though?
From back east, actually. I was back east, and I signed up with a credit union, not knowing anything about credit unions, and I loved it. And then I found a grocery store, and it became like a second family for me. And then I was looking for childcare, and I had some friends who had put their children in a cooperative daycare, and it was beautiful. And I thought, my idea was typical, thinking that Sam's Club was a cooperative. It was very, very minimal. And there was a group of people who were coming together talking about energy.
I'm sorry to cut you, but we got to take our first break here. I'm so sorry. We'll come right back. I really want to hear more about this, what happened in New York and how you brought it back. We'll be right back. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. This is Vernon Oakes, and the program is Everything Co-op. We're celebrating Native American Heritage Month. We have Bijiibah Begaye on with us today. She's from the Navajo Nation. She's in Flagstaff, Arizona right now. The organization she's with, the Cooperative Catalyst of New Mexico, is out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Before we took the break, she was talking about how she learned about co-ops in back east. So I want to go back to that. But before that, she was telling the sad story of how bad things were, and to some extent still are, at the Navajo Nations. No water. From 43 years, from 1966 to 2009, there was a problem where they could not even fix doors if they broke. And so with COVID-19, nobody came to their aid. The Navajo Nation shut down, put down a curfew, and folks was living in a house with multi-generational, and a very, very sad story. So we have another sad story. Chuck Snyder, the president of National Cooperative Bank, passed away last Saturday. Chuck was very instrumental in the start of this program 8 years ago, and every year they're out supporting us financially, the bank did, and also with ideas. Started an advisory committee, which he sat on. So next week, we're going to have this show where we're just going to honor Chuck and have people call in that knew him and talk about how he affected their life and their community. BJ, I have it that if Chuck could have come to the Navajo Nation and helped you all, he would have done that. He was the kind of guy, wherever there was a community problem, wherever there was an issue, he really supported the cooperative model as a solution, and the bank would create financial, they call it creative financial products to help with the different co-ops. But a great guy, passed, I think, very young at 68 years old, but he's much missed in this cooperative world. And like I said, we'll talk more about him next week. So what we're going to do here, matter of fact, have you all done any work with National Co-op Bank?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So you were talking about back east. Where back east were you? That you joined a credit union, loved it, a grocery store, and that became your family, second family, and then you found child care where folks brought their children in a child cooperative, and normally the fees are a lot less, and if it's owned by the consumer, the people that work that bring their kids there, then they work and they keep the price low. They may work in there also. So where were you in the back east?
I was in Buffalo, New York, and the grocery store was literally on the corner of my block, so my kids would just go over there all the time. And it was wonderful. The produce was great. A lot of the folks that we would see there were also at the farmers market, so it was a little safe haven.
Okay, and so, but you grew up in Navajo Nation, Arizona, New Mexico world. Okay, how did you end up in New York?
My mother is Tuscarora of New York, and I had my children, who you can probably actually hear in the background because there's no school today. So I do apologize. They might be jumping on here with me. My little one is just waking up.
Please do not apologize for young folk being young people. No. I will enjoy the sounds.
It's not the wonderful giggles, when they wake up. It's the grogginess. So we're going to work through it on our end. But I wanted to take my children back east to engage with community. The community there is very close-knit. And, oh gosh, I miss it. It's beautiful Haudenosaunee people and the culture and life ways. Just something that I miss dearly.
Okay. So your mother was back there. So you moved back. You have a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, and 9-year-old now. So you come back to home where you grew up, and right before the pandemic, and it's scary, is the word you used. Okay.
Yeah, so I decided to take my children back west. My family operates a ranch, and they raise all-American quarter horses, and my family needed some help, and it just seemed like a good opportunity. My eldest had never really engaged with some tumbleweeds before, so that was a big shock. And they certainly missed the green grass. But and my family lives off-grid. Everybody in the community hauls their water in. Food, everything. I think the closest grocery store was about 75 miles away. And
so how do you get groceries? Do you grow your own?
My family does have a garden, but they mostly drive into town about once a week.
75 miles away.
Yeah. There is one grocery store, but it doesn't provide a lot of options. There's no organic produce, nothing local. And it's a chain. It's been there as far back as I can remember. But
That's
it's very limited.
closer than the 75 miles is a grocery
Closer
store.
than the 75 miles. Yeah, you can get some basic supplies there. But if you really want to make sure you get everything you need, everyone usually drives into town, which is about 75 miles.
And what town is that?
That's Flagstaff. So everyone drives into Flagstaff to get bulk items and then drives back.
Okay. I've been to Flagstaff. I used to drive through Flagstaff. Okay. And Flagstaff is not far from the Grand Canyon. Is that right?
Yeah. I consider the Grand Canyon my backyard.
Okay. Okay, a big backyard.
It's a big backyard.
It's a big backyard. I didn't know how big the Grand Canyon was until I flew a helicopter over it for 1 hour and we didn't see it all. It was phenomenal how big the Grand Canyon is. When they say grand, it is grand. But you're a food desert. If you
Yes.
don't have food that would bring the nutrients, the organic, the produce, and so forth, and you have to drive 75 miles to get there. But you have your own garden.
Yeah. We have our own garden. We're a pastoral society, so livestock is really instrumental to our communities. Sheep is life, the bebeina. So my mom has a little flock, and they depend on that for meat.
Now, what is the flock again?
She raises churro sheep.
Oh, sheep. Okay. I don't know that first name, but sheep I know. Okay. 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 A sheep, quarter horses, a garden. You haul water in. You don't have a well or anything for water. And then
My family is cistern. A lot of the families just have, water drums that they fill up and take home.
okay. That's like St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. Their roofs. They would catch the water off the roof and it would go into their cistern or in their basement area with how they collected water.
And we do live off grid, so my family has a solar unit, photovoltaic system that provides electricity. So everything runs off of it. Sometimes in the winter it does get a little challenging, but that's what keeps us going.
Do you have a generator backup or any type of?
We do. It's a really terrible old one that my dad has had forever and always, and I'm hoping at one point, we're going to get something that's a little more modern. But yeah, I fight with the generator on a regular basis in the winter.
Oh, you do? Okay. Okay. So you come back and things are scary, very scary with COVID and these no resources. But your family is, I assume, better off than most. Is that correct? And that you have
They are. We are very fortunate, and it's a privilege that I never forget. And I feel like it's an additional responsibility that I have to help support community. So my family lives off grid. Prior to the pandemic hitting, I took some classes with native renewables, and they're located on the Navajo Nation, and they teach solar. So I learned how to build solar units, and that's something that I still engage in and work with various partners. So we're doing some solar cooperative development in the community and in surrounding communities.
Okay. So we're going to come back and talk more about your cooperative development. What kinds of co-ops are you all doing there? And I got that the co-ops are what you're looking to help solve the problems in the community, and you're looking to be able to band together and solve your problems. I got that. I appreciate that, and that's why I like co-ops. And I think co-ops are good for black people, brown people, native folks, anybody that is marginalized communities that too often this society, this greater society of America, has put us in bad shape. But we'll be right back and talk more about what's going on out there. Please don't touch that dial. Welcome back, everybody. We have today Bijiibah Begaye, who is our guest. She's a co-director of Cooperative Catalysts of New Mexico. She grew up in the Navajo Nation in the Arizona-New Mexico area. And she was telling us before we took break about her family's ranch and that they live off-grid and they're better off than most of the folks at the Navajo Nation. And she's very proud of that, but also know that there's a heavy responsibility when you're given much is expected kind of a thing. So Ruth, tell me how you got to work with the Cooperative Catalysts of New Mexico.
Sandra, the previous director, she had been giving a presentation at an organization, Change Labs. And if you haven't heard of Change Labs, I really suggest going out there and taking a look. Jessica Stagel and her crew are doing incredible things, including bringing the conversation of cooperative development into the community. So having my very superficial understanding of cooperative development from back east, I went to this presentation and it was a Co-op 101. And I had a million ideas and I wanted to continue the conversation, and I started the work with Native Renewables and their solar, and I was trying to create this network, and I really wanted to bring that cooperative model into my communities. And they offered me a position, and I started as a cooperative consultant and just moved up from there and really threw myself into it.
Threw yourself into it. Okay, so if you throw yourself into something, it must be that you love it or you see something good in it. What did you love about both the Change Lab and the Cooperative Catalysts of New Mexico that you would throw yourself into it?
I'm Native. I'm Indigenous. I, come from a very strong traditional community that has seen, the impact of the Bennett freeze. So self-determination was really important to my family, to my community, and to our nation. We didn't want to assimilate. We wanted our land bases, our values, our voices to govern in accordance with our traditional values and laws. And the cooperative model inherently supports that. Co-ops stabilize community because they are community-based businesses, and they recycle income. They multiply local expertise and capital within a community. And to me, all of those were benefits. All of those were appealing, and it made so much sense to put those things together. And for people who are working with limited resources, this essentially became the only model. We didn't have additional, capital coming in. We really had to pool resources, and that was integral. And Jessica Stagel from Change Labs will tell you, we're really seeing, she works in business development and business incubation. And we're going to start focusing some of our resources and our attention on just co-ops because of the lack of resources. It has been said before that this might be the only way for us to get economic security and to exercise self-determination. I could go on. I don't know how much time I have to talk about how beautiful I think the co-op model works with our communities and our values.
So what values do your community have that causes that co-op to fit within your value system?
Oh, they're so community rooted. You can't do a co-op unless you have community voice. It's not a top-down approach. You have to have really close-knit relationships, a lot of communication, and it's a vision that's coming essentially, from the ground up. It really is from the ground up. We don't have this, even in the nonprofit world, right, where there's a funding source and you have to adapt to that funding source. With co-ops, we identified that there's a need. And within our community, there's a plethora of need. There's an incredible lack of resources, childcare, aged living care, access to food, access to water. Who's going to oversee those water, development and operations? That's been a big part of it. Access to energy. So utility cooperatives, producer cooperatives. We are largely pastoral, and we herd communally already. So it fit within our traditional governing systems. So the challenge then became, how do we take something that has, Western implications, but really does fit within our traditional governing system and marry that? And we're working at Cooperative Catalyst really to find best practice around that.
So you said a mouthful or two, but it really fits into why I like co-ops. So one is all of the different co-ops, whether it's child care or how do you support folks that are getting old and people to come in and work with them. You call it age living, food, water, energy, health, everything you can think of, and the whole thing of how do you get resources and people to come in and help with the infrastructure kinds of things. So there are 4 types of co-ops. Let me quickly go through them. The first one, it depends on who owns and controls the business. If it's owned and controlled by the employees, it's called a worker co-op. So any business you can think of, all of them that you named could be a worker co-op. But if it's the business is owned and controlled by the people that uses the products or services, it's called a consumer co-op. So you could have housing co-ops, credit union, food co-ops. There's a health clinic in Madison, Wisconsin that's owned by the patients, which is interesting. They set the policies and procedures. Food co-ops could be worker-owned or it could be consumer-owned. Most have been consumer-owned. And then if you get a group of people to come together or a group of businesses that come together and create a business that purchase the thing that they need. The farmers have done this. Artists are doing it. They come together and buy the things that they need. Normally they become experts in what they need, working with vendors, creating contracts, and getting better quality for a lower price. And so that's called a purchasing co-op. And the 4th type is a marketing co-op. The same thing, a group of people or businesses, farmers have been doing this a lot, come together and market their products. You may have a farm in Wisconsin that does milk, and their milk may end up in New York or California with companies like Cabot Creamery or Land O'Lakes. And then Ocean Spray is a marketing co-op. There is, it's called marketing or producer, and the Zuni artist co-op that we had on last week was a producer marketing co-op, and there's one for black women in Pittsburgh that's a artist co-op called Ujamaa. So those are the 4 types of co-ops, and they work for all of the reasons that you were talking about. That's why I'm so glad to have you on, because when you look at the Navajo Nation and all their needs are, the capitalistic model just doesn't work because most of the capitalists just want to figure out how much money they can make. That's the number one priority, which I learned in my MBA program. What's the greatest return on investment? And that's the main way that folks would go. So what co-ops are you working on that the Cooperative Catalyst of New Mexico is working on right now?
So right now, we just came up with a 3-year intensive plan strategy to develop the ecosystem out here. Co-op development here in the Southwest does not look anything like it does back east. There's still a lot of growing and support systems that we need to put in place. So we're working with Southwestern Indian Polytechnic Institute, and they're doing a research project, and we're assisting in that research project to understand best practice of cooperative development within Indigenous communities. We intend to then take that best practice and develop these robust incubators and accelerators. And that's part of it. The other part of it that we're focused on specifically on the Navajo Nation is with different organizations and companies that are wanting to partner with cooperatives. So Navajo Power, for instance, they're developing Navajo Power Homes, and it's about solar cooperative development. So we have a group of women who have expertise in solar, who are organizing themselves into a cooperative. They don't have a name yet, but they are coming together, and that's a resource they're going to supply. Other initiatives we're working on are around water development. So Talani Lake Enterprises worked very closely with the Navajo Nation to drill wells during the pandemic. And we worked really hard to get that into our communities, especially, with the lack of access. But the question then became, who's going to oversee it? And we decided the cooperative model might be the most suitable opportunity for that. access to food sovereignty. We live in a food desert. There was just all of the breaks in where our community was not situated to deal with something like a pandemic, to provide for our communities on some of the most basic level: food, housing, shelter, access to electricity, all of those things. So we're taking the cooperative model and really pushing it into what else can we do.
So are you familiar with, on the food side, there's a conference in about February, March time frame. It's called Up and Coming. Up and Coming are folks that are creating food co-ops. So I went there 1 year. I was going back a second year. And no, I did go 2 years. They had folks from Detroit and Flint, Michigan, all over the U.S. that are, and mostly people of color, that's creating food co-ops. There was one group from D.C. that was there to see about Washington, D.C., a food co-op in Southeast, which is a food desert in Washington, D.C., in our neighborhood. And so how do we take control of our neighborhood and provide the kinds of services that are needed? Now, I'm hearing what's so nice about the Navajo Nation. You have your land, you have your population, you have your governance, and you can control and say what happens there. You have more of a control than other neighborhoods, I should say. Don't have total. But Up and Coming is a conference that works. Now, you had mentioned about working with older folks and creating some co-ops around folks that do that. I'm missing the term, but there's a co-op in New York that's 1,500 members, which is the largest worker co-op, and they are people that go into houses and work with disabled or seniors so they can live in place longer. And these 1,500 people own the business, and they set their salaries, and if or the profit, they get to keep it, or they get to say what happens to that profit. And right now, the Co-op Development Fund, CDF, has taken on themselves to have an annual meeting. I think it's in August, but they have a lot of information, and they have some startup monies for that too, that they help people. I don't know if it's in some kind of contest or not, but they help folks start up these co-ops.
Yeah, no, I wish my coworker Caitlin, so we're in a co-directorship, and Caitlin Kundrat, she's the one on our team who's really leading that initiative. Caitlin would be able to tell you about our work and our contract partnership, really, with New Mexico Aging and Long-Term Services Department, and that also includes their workforce solutions. So they're investing approximately $1 million into supporting caregiver co-ops to launch in rural areas of the state. So we're seeing a strong signal. The climate is changing here in the Southwest, and there are numerous entities locally and within the government that are vested in seeing this model succeed. So we're really excited and happy to be part of that. And at some point, I would love to have her on to talk about it.
We're going to come right back and talk about that and what else is going to happen in the future. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. The program is Everything Co-op, and before we took a break, Ruth Begaye and I were talking about having the name of it's called home health care. Okay, that's what I was looking for. So I just went to cdf.coop. That's the Cooperative Development Foundation's webpage. And they had their 5th annual National Home Health Care Conference. It was February the 22nd through the 26th. So I said August. I was mistaken. And so I assumed this coming February they'll have another home health care. And it was free for home care cooperative caregivers and administrators. And so last year it was virtual. And years before that it was in Virginia. So if it's virtual again, then you all could be a part of that, and that seems to be a great place of getting knowledge of how you do home health care cooperatives. There is a lot of information around to help with all of the things that you're talking about. Child care, you call it age living. Home health care is the term for that industry. Food co-ops, this up and coming. Water, energy. It seemed like the rural electric co-ops would be really helpful because they'll go out into rural areas. They created rural electric co-ops, but also in foreign countries. Seemed like they would want to come in and help with the Navajo country in creating power and solar power and broadband. So do you all have broadband in Navajo Nation?
We don't. That's another need. We need it all. We're looking at Starlink right now, actually, and what kind of access we can get there. But that was a huge challenge during the pandemic with kids going to school, people having jobs, maintaining those jobs. We had the buses, actually. They would come out with a little booster so you could park next to the bus so that you could do your homework. And my kids did that for a little while. But yeah, okay. No, access to broadband is also zero infrastructure. You name it, we need it.
So I really see where this co-op model can help revitalize or even create the kind of community that you want, that the Navajo Nation people want.
I am really excited about the opportunity that co-ops have. And to me, it's close to home. It really does hit close to home. The capitalist model does not suit our communities. We've seen that through exploitation, unfortunately. And I think it's an opportunity for community voice and for community really to shape where we want to go, how we want to develop. And, the interesting part of the work, and I'm just a fly on the wall. Again, my coworker, Caitlin, is really leading that project around the age living with ALTSD. But the desire for folks who are looking at long-term care to stay within their homes, what options can we provide? And that the government is really looking to support that voice and hearing people that they don't want to be in nursing homes. What kind of additional services can we provide to the care workers, caretakers themselves?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I mentioned about values before, but the values of cooperation and principles is what I like. And I go first when somebody calls themselves a co-op to see how are they doing with the ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. I put caring for one another, which is the golden rule, which most faith-based organizations have. And I find in whether it's Native or Zuni or African tribes or clans or pueblos, whatever you call them, this caring for others was at the center of life. And if it wasn't for this community where everybody knew what their role was, if it wasn't for community, we wouldn't be here, because I have it. That's the core of humanity, is working together and supporting each other, caring for one another. And when I was asking you about your values, is that at the core of the Navajo Nation's values also, caring for one another?
So I think culturally, we really focus on family. We have this concept of which is about family. Our clan system is rooted in finding relations. So all of my relations, we are very much what is in the best interest of community. And that's one of the things that I love about cooperative principles, concern for community. And it fits within our traditional value system beautifully. It also has the flexibility that we need, that you don't find in other economic models. And I think it's also about creating intergenerational wealth.
Yes.
That's part of what we're trying to create is how do we get our children into these systems that are going to provide long-term, resources for them that they can tap into. That's not just, one person had one idea around this one business and it just benefits that individual. We're developing communities really from the ground up with the cooperative model.
So in Puerto Rico, I had on the show once that they have had co-ops in schools. I think it was for 60 years they've had co-ops in schools, and at the time, which was about 4 years ago, they had 54 different co-ops within schools from elementary school through college where the students owned the business, and they learned how to work together and have board meetings and do all the kinds of things that you need to do in business. And so I've been talking about that model. Would like to see if we could get that model out there where even in Navajo Nation, you could get these co-ops, not only the co-ops that the adults would have formed and run, but where the students could have, where they sell the supplies, school supplies, or candies, not candy as much as some kind of a food co-op within the school systems. But a co-op that provides some kind of computer learning or training, or there's all kinds of possibilities in this. And I'd like to see it get into the school system. Have you all thought about that?
Yeah, that's a really exciting point. Our schools really do focus on trades skills. We have at the high school, there's a child care certification program. There's also a nursing program. So when you come out of high school, you should have a certification to go straight into the market. So that was part of the conversation that Caitlin and I were having around aging and long-term care, that there are going to be job opportunities for people right out of the gate, that they would have the skill set and that they would be business owners. That's really exciting as a young person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you could come out and you could be a part of this business. You could own it. You could have a voice in it. You're not just coming out of the gate working for this industry and working your way up. We trust that they have the skill set, and now they have the ability to build on their wealth. And that feeds into the community in a beautiful way. It's something that we need. It's something that we value. And it's cyclic. And I love that. I absolutely love co-ops. I cannot say enough about it. I'm really excited.
Well,
and part
two
of
us.
The downside of this, talking about the Bennett freeze, is there was no infrastructure. There was no access. But the upside is it gave us a blank slate. And we have this blank slate to now use cooperatives to really shape and form our communities. And we're looking at, we don't have to walk through or remedy the capitalist market per se, because there is no infrastructure. And I'm really excited to see where we go in the next 3 to 10 to 20 years with this initiative.
So I really like the trade skills, nursing, childcare, fixing cars, construction, all of the different trades and constructions, accounting, different things in computers, advertising, creating copy. So the students could belong to a co-op that's inside the school or that's in the school and outside, so that they're working with the co-op of adults that are in the community, and the children are learning and working, and they then not only do they have a job, but they're part of an owner when they graduate. This is happening in the jail systems, in penal systems. There's one in Italy that's a bakery, and the folks there are in the system, in the jails, are working in the bakeries. And so when they get out, they don't go back to jail because they have a family to go to, just like you talked about. They have a job that they go to. They have skills that they already have. So this co-op thing works. It works. Where do you want to be in, you said 10 years, 5, 10, 20 years?
I have this dream, and I am very grandiose, but there is going to be a utopia that is just co-ops, providing housing, providing electricity, all of those basic necessities. And I'm going to try not to cry right now because I cannot tell you for the hope that I feel using this model in my community after you see how much challenge and how hard it has been, how hard we've been hit by the pandemic, and to find something that feels tangible, to feel, something that fits within our community values. I truly believe, and I know for a fact, we're going to build the utopia of co-ops on the Navajo Nation and be a leading voice for that.
I want to come out and visit you. I'd like to see what I can do to help you with that. I'm excited and got chills, not only when I cried, but just excited about this utopia of cooperatives in the Navajo Nation. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
Have a wonderful day. Enjoy your children. And for everybody out there, please live cooperatively, and we'll see you next Thursday where we'll honor Chuck Snyder.